Settle into the Sleepy Mind channel. Tonight, we will explore one of the strangest landscapes ever created by human hands. Far across the dry deserts of southern Peru, enormous drawings stretch across the earth. Some resemble birds, with wings wider than football fields. Others form long, straight paths that run across the desert floor for great distances. For centuries, these massive patterns remained quiet beneath the desert sun, almost hidden within the landscape itself. From ground level, many of them appear incomplete or difficult to understand. Only high above the earth does their full shape begin to emerge. If you enjoy stories like these, feel free to like and subscribe. More videos on fascinating topics are posted weekly. You can also check out the playlist for more calm journeys through history, science, nature, and ancient worlds. The Nazca Lines are among the most unusual archaeological sites on Earth because they challenge ordinary expectations about scale. Human beings are familiar with paintings, carvings, and monuments that stand upright above the ground. But the Nazca Lines are different. They are not built upward into the sky. Instead, they were drawn directly onto the desert surface itself. The land became the canvas. Some lines run in perfect straight paths across rough desert terrain. Some form spirals or geometric figures. Others resemble animals, plants, and living creatures stretched across the dry landscape at astonishing size. Many people first encounter the Nazca Lines through aerial photographs. From high above the desert, giant figures appear across the earth clearly. A hummingbird stretches across the ground with long, delicate wings. A monkey curls into a spiral tail. A spider extends its legs across the desert floor. At first glance, the images can seem almost impossible to understand. The designs are so large that standing beside them reveals very little of their true form. A person walking directly across one of these figures might not even realize they were standing within an enormous drawing. From the ground, the desert appears mostly empty. From the sky, the landscape transforms into a massive collection of patterns spread across the earth. Southern Peru provides the setting for this unusual place. The Nazca region lies between the Pacific coast and the Andes Mountains, within one of the driest environments on Earth. The desert landscape appears harsh and quiet beneath sunlight. Rocky hills rise above open plains, covered with reddish-brown stones. Dry valleys cut across the terrain where water rarely flows. In many places, almost no vegetation interrupts the surface. The stillness of the region becomes part of the mystery itself, because the landscape appears almost untouched by time. Modern roads and settlements exist nearby, yet vast sections of the desert remain open and quiet beneath the sky, much as they appeared centuries ago. The dryness of the environment plays an enormous role in the survival of the Nazca Lines. In wetter climates, rainfall gradually erodes exposed surfaces. Plants spread roots into the soil. Wind and flowing water slowly reshape the ground. In the Nazca Desert, however, rain is limited. Some areas may go long periods with little measurable rainfall. Because of these conditions, the desert surface remains stable. The designs created across this landscape are known as geoglyphs. A geoglyph is a large shape or image formed directly on the surface of the earth. Unlike a painting placed onto stone or canvas, a geoglyph uses the land itself as the material. Human beings have created geoglyphs in different parts of the world, but the Nazca Lines became some of the most famous examples ever discovered because of their immense size and variety. Some consist of simple straight paths that cross the plains. Others form shaped figures that can only truly be appreciated from above. Together, they create one of the largest collections of ancient surface designs on Earth. The scale of the Nazca Lines changes the way people think about ancient construction. Modern cities are filled with buildings designed to rise upward, where they can be seen from streets below. The Nazca people instead created something spread outward across the desert. Imagine standing beside a drawing so large that its full shape disappears beyond your field of vision. A single wing of a bird figure may extend farther than several city blocks. Straight lines stretch so far across the ground that they appear to merge with the horizon itself. One reason the Nazca Lines continue to fascinate people is because they combine simplicity with enormous ambition. The designs were not carved deeply into stone cliffs or built from giant blocks. They were created through surprisingly simple methods placed onto an immense landscape. Ancient communities used the desert surface itself to produce visible patterns across the ground. This combination of simple actions and massive scale creates much of the wonder surrounding the site today. The designs appear quiet and almost delicate from the air, yet they required planning, organization, and understanding of the landscape. Bright sunlight washes across the plains during the day, while distant mountains form dark silhouettes against the horizon. Shadows lengthen slowly across the rocky ground during evening hours. The landscape often appears empty at first glance, yet hidden patterns lie spread across the surface waiting to be recognized. This contrast between emptiness and hidden structure gives the region much of its unusual feeling. Temples, pyramids, and towers draw attention upward through height and visibility. The Nazca Lines accomplish something very different. Their power comes from scale, distance, and perspective. Instead of lifting structures into the sky, ancient communities transform the desert floor into an enormous surface of shapes and lines. The result is one of the few places on Earth where history becomes visible across an entire landscape rather than within a single building or monument. The Nazca Lines also reveal how human beings interact with environments in creative ways. The desert may appear empty or lifeless from a distance, but ancient communities understood the land closely. They learned how the surface behaved beneath changing weather conditions. They recognized which areas remained stable over long periods. They understood how visible patterns could persist within the dry environment. Without the stable desert climate, many of these ancient designs would likely have disappeared long ago. At first glance, the desert surface surrounding the Nazca Lines can appear plain and empty beneath the sunlight. Wide stretches of rocky ground extend toward distant hills, while reddish-brown stones cover much of the landscape. The surface looks rough, dry, and almost motionless beneath the heat. Yet hidden within this seemingly ordinary terrain is the reason the Nazca Lines became possible in the first place. The desert itself contains two different layers of color. Ancient communities discovered that by altering only the upper surface of the ground, visible patterns could appear across the landscape. The designs across the Nazca Desert are known as geoglyphs because they are shapes formed directly on the surface of the earth. Unlike paintings created on walls or carvings cut into stone, geoglyphs depend entirely upon the landscape itself. The Nazca people worked with the natural conditions already present around them. Across the desert floor, Dark-colored stones formed a layer covering lighter soil beneath. Beneath those stones, however, the ground remained noticeably lighter in color. The process itself was surprisingly simple. Ancient communities moved away the darker stones covering the desert floor. Once the upper layer was removed, the lighter earth beneath became visible. Against the surrounding reddish-brown surface, these lighter sections formed lines that could be seen clearly from above. The designs did not require deep trenches or massive walls. In many places, the lines were only shallow depressions within the desert surface. Yet the contrast between dark and light created patterns large enough to remain visible across enormous distances. The Nazca Lines instead relied on understanding visibility, contrast, and landscape conditions. Imagine drawing across a dusty surface with a finger. The darker material moves aside, while a lighter layer beneath becomes visible. The Nazca people applied a similar concept across a vast desert environment. What might appear simple at a small scale became astonishing when extended across open plains, large enough to contain giant birds, spirals, and geometric paths. The simplicity of the technique makes the immense scale feel even more remarkable. The dark stones covering the desert floor played an important role in making the designs visible. These rocks absorbed heat beneath the strong desert sun and gradually developed darker surfaces over long exposure to the environment. Their deeper coloration created a natural contrast against the pale material below. Under sunlight, these differences became especially visible from elevated perspectives. The designs could stretch across large sections of terrain while remaining clearly separated from the surrounding ground. The lighter soil beneath the stones remained protected for long periods beneath the desert surface. Because it was not exposed directly to the same environmental conditions, it preserved a noticeably different appearance. This natural layering allowed the Nazca people to create visible patterns without needing pigments, dyes, or added building materials. The earth already contained the necessary contrast. Human activity simply revealed what was hidden beneath the upper layer. In this way, the Nazca Lines became a collaboration between human action and natural geology. The landscape itself supplied the materials needed to produce the designs. Creating these lines still required planning, labor, and coordination. Although the process of removing stones was simple in principle, maintaining long straight paths across uneven desert terrain demanded organization. Some lines extend great distances while preserving impressive consistency in direction. Others curve into spirals or form recognizable animal figures with balanced proportions. Ancient communities worked within a harsh desert environment beneath intense sunlight, while shaping patterns large enough to stretch beyond ordinary human perspective. The quiet appearance of the finished lines can sometimes hide the enormous effort required to organize such projects across open ground. The Nazca Desert itself helped support this unusual method of construction. In wetter regions, exposed soil quickly changes appearance through rain, plant growth, or erosion. In southern Peru, however, the dry climate preserved the contrast between the lighter exposed ground and the darker surrounding surface. The landscape acted almost like a natural storage system, protecting the designs from many forms of environmental change. This preservation allowed the lines to remain visible long after the people who created them had disappeared from history. In heavily forested environments or regions with thick vegetation, such patterns would quickly become hidden. The Nazca Desert, instead, offered broad exposed plains where lines could continue across long distances without interruption. Dry conditions limited plant growth, while stable weather reduced erosion. The land itself became both the medium and the protector of the artwork spread across it. Creating the Nazca Lines did not require giant machines, towering structures, or massive blocks of stone. The process depended instead upon patience, repetition, and understanding of the desert surface. Ancient communities walked across the dry plains of southern Peru, carrying simple tools while shaping patterns directly into the earth. The work likely unfolded gradually beneath the desert sun as groups of people removed dark surface stones from selected areas. Each movement exposed lighter ground beneath, and slowly, visible lines began appearing across the landscape. What seems large today emerged through many small actions, repeated across wide stretches of open terrain. The desert floor itself provided the perfect material for this method of construction. Dark stones rested loosely across the surface, while pale soil remained hidden underneath. Ancient workers did not need to cut deeply into rock or transport heavy materials over long distances. Instead, they cleared away the upper layer. The difference in color immediately produced visible marks against the surrounding ground. Imagine brushing dust away from a surface to reveal a brighter layer beneath. The Nazca Lines formed through a similar relationship between concealment and exposure. The designs were always possible because the desert already contained the necessary contrast waiting beneath the surface stones. Although the technique sounds simple, organizing large designs across open desert required planning. Some straight lines extend for great distances while preserving stable direction. Others form curves, spirals, or recognizable animal figures with balanced proportions. Creating these patterns without modern aerial views required close attention to measurement and spatial awareness. Ancient communities likely used markers, ropes, or observed reference points across the landscape to maintain alignment. Even slight errors would become increasingly visible as the lines extended farther across the plains. The precision still visible today suggests deliberate organization rather than random placement. Many visitors imagine giant trenches carved dramatically into the earth, yet the actual lines are often relatively modest depressions in the desert surface. The power of the designs comes from visibility rather than physical height. A shallow, exposed strip of lighter soil becomes highly noticeable when extended across large areas. Human vision responds strongly to contrast and pattern, especially across open terrain. The Nazca people understood how slight changes to the landscape could create striking visual effects over enormous distances. Straight lines became one of the defining features of the Nazca Desert. Some extend across hillsides and plains with surprising consistency. Standing beside one of these lines can create a strange visual experience because the path appears to continue endlessly toward the horizon. The open desert intensifies this feeling. Without forests, rivers, or dense vegetation interrupting the terrain, the lines remain exposed across broad, empty spaces. Animal figures required different forms of organization than straight paths. A hummingbird, monkey, or spider could not simply continue endlessly in one direction. These shapes demanded curves, proportions, and recognizable outlines. Ancient communities needed to imagine how separate lines would combine into larger forms spread across the landscape. This ability to organize large images across open terrain reflects impressive visual planning. Modern artists often sketch small designs before enlarging them onto larger surfaces. The Nazca people may have used similar forms of scaling and organization while adapting them to the desert environment around them. The process of creating geoglyphs also required sustained physical effort. The Nazca Desert can become extremely hot and dry during daylight hours. Workers clearing stones from the surface likely spent long periods exposed beneath strong sunlight with little natural shelter nearby. The quiet appearance of the finished lines sometimes hides the labor involved in producing them. Every exposed section of lighter soil represents human movement across the landscape. Over time, countless individual actions combine to create patterns large enough to remain visible centuries later. Some lines extend across uneven terrain, including slopes and shallow rises in the landscape. Ancient workers adapted the designs to natural geography rather than flattening the desert completely. The desert was not transformed into a perfectly artificial surface. The designs became part of the landscape rather than separate objects placed upon it. The visibility of the lines changes depending upon lighting conditions and perspective. Under bright sunlight, the contrast between dark stones and lighter exposed ground becomes more noticeable. From elevated positions, patterns emerge more clearly across the plains. Nearby ground level reveals texture, stone and surface detail, while higher viewpoints reveal broader organization. The desert constantly shifts between these two scales of experience. Up close, the lines appear simple. From above, they transform into massive coordinated patterns. Straight paths, balanced figures, and geometric organization appear repeatedly across the desert surface. These patterns reflect intentional design rather than accidental marks left by movement through the environment. Human activity transformed empty plains into organized visual structures spread across enormous areas. The desert became a place where ideas, symbols, and shapes could be expressed directly onto the earth. Many observers wonder how ancient communities maintained straight alignment across such long distances. Even with modern roads, construction projects, and surveying equipment, maintaining consistent direction across open terrain requires careful measurement. Yet many Nazca lines remain impressively straight, despite crossing rough desert surfaces. The achievement becomes even more striking when considering the tools likely available at the time. Ancient communities developed methods of observation and planning suited to their environment. Their understanding of landscape, distance, and alignment allowed them to organize patterns still visible many centuries later. The immense scale of the Nazca Lines is one of the main reasons they continue to fascinate people around the world. Human beings are accustomed to viewing drawings, symbols, and artworks at sizes that fit comfortably within ordinary vision. A painting hangs upon a wall. A map rests across a table. A design appears on paper small enough to hold within two hands. The Nazca Lines exist at an entirely different scale. Many of the figures spread across areas so large that the human eye struggles to understand them from nearby ground level. A person standing inside one of the animal figures may only see isolated sections of lines crossing the desert floor. The complete image emerges only when distance and elevation reveal the larger pattern hidden within the landscape. Some Nazca lines extend across the desert for great distances. Straight paths continue over open plains and low hills while maintaining consistent direction. Standing beside one of these lines creates a strange experience because the path appears almost endless beneath the bright desert sky. The line stretches toward the horizon until heat, distance, and light gradually blur its edges into the surrounding landscape. Unlike roads or walking paths created for practical travel, many Nazca Lines seem designed primarily for visibility and organization across enormous space. Their scale transforms the desert into a surface large enough to contain giant geometric structures. The animal figures demonstrate this same relationship between scale and perception. A hummingbird spreads delicate wings across the ground at a size far beyond ordinary human drawings. A monkey curls into a large spiral tail, visible only from elevated perspectives. A spider extends long, thin legs across the rocky terrain. Some figures measure hundreds of feet across, while others occupy broad sections of the desert plain. The experience becomes difficult for the brain to process because human beings rarely encounter images built at such massive dimensions directly into the earth. Scale changes the way people emotionally respond to space. Small objects feel personal and immediate because the entire form can be understood at once. Enormous structures create a different sensation because the mind cannot easily hold the complete image while standing nearby. The Nazca Lines produce this effect constantly. From ground level, viewers see fragments of shapes, isolated paths, and sections of exposed soil. Only when enough distance is gained does the organization become clear. Before aircraft and satellite imagery, many patterns could only be partially understood from nearby hills or elevated terrain. From high above the desert, however, the lines suddenly organize into recognizable forms. Animal figures emerge clearly. Straight paths intersect across the plains in organized arrangements. Geometric structures spread across the landscape like giant diagrams drawn onto the earth. Most monuments are designed to impress people standing nearby. Towers rise overhead. Statues face outward toward approaching visitors. Temples dominate surrounding landscapes through height and physical presence. The Nazca Lines operate differently. Their full impact depends upon distance rather than closeness. The farther away a viewer moves, the clearer the designs often become. The open terrain of southern Peru helped make these enormous designs possible. Broad plains with limited vegetation provided uninterrupted surfaces where lines could continue for long distances without obstruction. In heavily forested regions, large patterns would quickly disappear beneath plant growth. In mountainous terrain, steep slopes would interrupt visibility. The Nazca Desert, instead, offered wide exposed surfaces extending beneath clear skies. Ancient communities recognized that the environment around them could support patterns far larger than those possible in many other landscapes. Straight lines create some of the most striking visual effects within the Nazca region because they interact strongly with human perception. People notice alignment and direction across open space. A single straight path cutting across empty desert immediately draws attention because it contrasts with the irregular patterns normally found in nature. Their simplicity becomes part of their power. A basic geometric form repeated across great distance creates an effect both calm and mysterious at the same time. Scale also influences how difficult the Nazca Lines were to organize. Enormous figures spread across the desert could not be viewed completely from a single nearby position. Ancient communities likely relied on planning methods, reference points, and organized movement across the terrain to maintain proportions and alignment. This required a different kind of thinking than ordinary drawing. The Nazca people worked across space large enough to challenge normal human perspective. Wide plains stretch beneath strong sunlight, while distant mountains remain visible across the horizon. Shadows move slowly across the ground during evening hours. Within this broad, empty landscape, the lines appear both delicate and immense at the same time. Thin, exposed paths create large structures without needing height, walls, or massive stone construction. Human beings often associate large-scale construction with enormous weight and physical mass. Cities rise upward through steel and concrete. Ancient pyramids required massive stone blocks. The Nazca Lines demonstrate another form of scale entirely. Their power comes not from vertical height, but from horizontal reach. A shallow line across the desert can become striking simply because of how far it extends across the landscape. Long before aircraft revealed giant figures across the desert floor, long before archaeologists studied the region from photographs and satellite images, people were already living within the dry landscapes of southern Peru. The creators of the Nazca Lines belonged to a civilization now known as the Nazca culture. These ancient communities lived in one of the harshest environments in South America, surrounded by dry plains, rocky hills, and valleys where water remained limited and unpredictable. Their survival depended upon understanding the land closely. Every source of water, every fertile area, and every seasonal environmental change carried importance within daily life. The Nazca culture developed in the region many centuries ago, during a period when different societies were emerging across the western side of South America. While large civilizations later became famous for stone cities and mountain roads high within the Andes, the Nazca people adapted themselves to the dry coastal deserts farther west. The environment around them shaped nearly every part of existence. Desert heat, limited rainfall, and difficult geography influenced where communities settled, how food was grown, and how people organized movement across the land. At first glance, the Nazca Desert can appear almost impossible for large communities to inhabit comfortably. Wide stretches of dry ground extend beneath strong sunlight, while little vegetation interrupts the landscape. Rivers do not flow constantly across the plains. Rainfall remains limited, yet human societies have always shown remarkable ability to adapt themselves to difficult environments when reliable resources become available. In the Nazca region, survival often depended upon valleys and underground water sources connected to seasonal rivers flowing from the Andes Mountains far to the east. The Andes play a major role in shaping the environment of Peru. High mountain peaks collect moisture and snowfall, while rivers gradually carry water downward toward lower elevations. In some regions near Nazca, these rivers create narrow, fertile valleys cutting through the desert. Ancient communities settled near these areas because agriculture became possible where water could be reached. Green fields and cultivated land sometimes existed beside otherwise dry surroundings. The contrast between fertile valleys and open desert shaped much of life for the Nazca people. Water carried enormous importance within the desert world surrounding the Nazca Lines. In wetter climates, water may feel ordinary because rainfall appears regularly throughout the year. In the dry landscapes of southern Peru, however, reliable water sources determined survival itself. Farming, drinking water, and daily activity all depended upon careful management of limited resources. Ancient communities learned how to work with seasonal conditions while adapting to one of the driest regions on Earth. The Nazca people did not live isolated from the environment around them. Instead, daily life depended upon careful observation of weather, geography, and changing seasonal conditions. Farmers needed to understand how water moved through valleys and dry riverbeds. Travelers crossing open desert terrain needed knowledge of routes, distances, and environmental hazards. Communities learned how to survive within a landscape where conditions could quickly become difficult beneath heat and dryness. The desert was not simply empty land surrounding them. It was the environment that shaped nearly every aspect of existence. Archaeological discoveries reveal that the Nazca culture created pottery, textiles, and other artistic works alongside the famous desert geoglyphs. Many surviving ceramics contain colorful designs, animals, and geometric patterns reflecting strong visual organization and artistic skill. This suggests that the people responsible for the Nazca Lines also lived within a broader cultural world filled with symbolism, craftsmanship, and organized social activity. The lines themselves formed only one part of a much larger human society spread across the desert valleys of southern Peru. Life within the Nazca region likely required cooperation between communities because environmental survival depended upon managing limited resources. Water systems, agricultural land, and movement across difficult terrain all demanded organization. Ancient societies often became highly aware of environmental cycles because survival depended upon understanding them closely. Changes in rainfall, river flow, and climate conditions would have influenced farming success, food availability, and settlement stability across the region. The environment shaped not only practical survival, but also cultural identity and human behavior. The dry desert landscape surrounding the Nazca Lines can sometimes feel timeless because environmental change occurs slowly there compared with wetter climates. A person standing upon the plains today may still see broad stretches of open terrain similar to those experienced centuries ago. Distant mountains rise beyond the horizon, while dry winds move quietly across rocky ground beneath the sunlight. This continuity between past and present strengthens the emotional effect of the Nazca Lines themselves. The same desert environment that surrounded the ancient Nazca people still surrounds the lines today. Geography strongly influenced movement within the region. Open plains allowed travel across certain areas, while rocky hills and dry valleys created natural boundaries throughout the landscape. Ancient pathways likely connected settlements, agricultural zones, and important ceremonial locations. The Nazca Lines themselves became part of this wider environment, shaped by human movement and interaction with the land. Straight paths crossing the desert may have carried practical, symbolic, or ceremonial significance within the larger cultural world of the Nazca people. The open desert may appear empty to modern visitors arriving from greener regions of the world, but ancient communities experienced the landscape differently because they understood its rhythms and resources closely. Valleys provided opportunities for farming. River systems brought seasonal water from distant mountains. Stable dry surfaces allowed patterns to survive across long periods. Human life adapted itself around the possibilities and limitations created by geography itself. Ancient communities lived, traveled, farmed, and created within the same desert, where giant geoglyphs still remain visible today. The lines became part of a broader relationship between people and landscape that developed slowly across generations. Dry plains, scarce water, and open terrain all helped shape the civilization, responsible for transforming the desert floor into a recognizable archaeological landscape on Earth. The Nazca Lines were not created all at once in a single moment of construction. The vast collection of geoglyphs spread across southern Peru developed gradually over time as different groups of people continued shaping the desert surface across generations. Some designs may be older than others by many years. Certain figures likely appeared during different phases of Nazca culture, while additional lines continued extending across the landscape later. The desert slowly accumulated human activity until the region itself became a kind of historical surface, carrying traces of many separate moments across time. When people look at aerial photographs of the Nazca Lines, it can be easy to imagine the entire landscape emerging from one enormous coordinated project. In reality, ancient societies often build large cultural environments gradually over long periods. Cities expand across generations. Roads extend slowly outward from settlements. Religious sites change shape as new structures are added over time. The Nazca Desert likely evolved in a similar way. Human activity slowly layered itself across the landscape until hundreds of designs spread throughout the region. The dry environment played an important role in allowing this gradual accumulation to remain visible. In wetter climates, older marks upon the ground disappear more quickly through erosion, flooding, and plant growth. The Nazca Desert instead preserved traces of activity for long periods. Once lines were created, they often remained visible beneath the stable surface conditions. This allowed new designs to exist beside older ones across the same broad landscape. The desert became a place where human actions remained recorded directly upon the earth. Cultural practices likely shaped how and why these designs continued appearing across the region. Human societies create visible symbols for many reasons, including ritual activity, communication, social organization, and environmental relationships. The Nazca Lines may have reflected changing traditions developing through different periods of community life. Certain designs could have carried symbolic meaning, while others may have related to movement, ceremonies, or important locations within the landscape. Even today, archaeologists continue studying how the lines connected to broader aspects of Nazca society and cultural behavior. Instead of preserving history only within objects or buildings, the Nazca people left patterns directly across the ground itself. The landscape became part of cultural memory. Straight paths, animal figures, and geometric structures spread across the desert, while surviving long after the people who created them disappeared. Human activity remained fixed within the terrain beneath the dry skies of southern Peru. Ancient communities probably understood the region differently from modern visitors arriving through aircraft or tourism. The Nazca Desert was part of everyday existence rather than an isolated historical site. Paths crossed the plains. Settlements occupied nearby valleys. Water sources influenced movement and survival. The lines existed within this wider human environment, shaped by practical needs, cultural traditions, and environmental knowledge. The geoglyphs became woven into the landscape people already inhabited, rather than standing apart from ordinary life. Human activity often leaves traces upon environments over time. Roads wear into soil. Stone pathways remain visible after centuries. Agricultural terraces reshape hillsides. The Nazca Lines represent one of the largest examples of this relationship between people and landscape, because the markings became visible across such immense distances. The desert surface slowly accumulated organized patterns through repeated human effort across generations. Each line reflected physical movement across the earth. Over time, those movements created structures large enough to remain visible even from the sky. The open plains of southern Peru allowed this process to continue because the environment remained stable enough to preserve earlier work. New geoglyphs did not necessarily erase previous designs completely. Different layers of cultural activity could coexist across the same region. The desert acted almost like a giant surface, preserving memory through visibility and stability. Ancient communities may not have imagined that the lines would survive for centuries, yet the environmental conditions around them quietly protected their work across time. Archaeologists studying the Nazca Lines often examine differences in style, shape, and construction methods to better understand how the designs may have developed during different periods. Certain figures appear more complex, while others remain simple geometric forms. Some lines cross over others, suggesting that different phases of activity occurred across the same terrain. This gradual layering reveals that the Nazca Lines were not fixed creations, frozen in one instant. They formed through an ongoing relationship between people and environment, unfolding across long spans of time. The scale of the Nazca Lines also means that many people likely participated in their creation over time. Organizing large patterns across open desert required labor, planning, and cooperation. Groups of workers moved stones, maintained alignments, and shaped visible paths across the terrain. The lines therefore represent not only artistic ideas, but also collective human effort carried out beneath difficult desert conditions. The quiet simplicity of the finished designs can sometimes hide the social organization necessary to create them. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the Nazca Lines is not only how they were created, but how they survived for so long beneath the sky. Many ancient structures around the world slowly disappear through erosion, plant growth, flooding, or changing weather conditions. Rain gradually softens exposed surfaces. Wind carries loose soil across landscapes. Trees and grasses spread roots through abandoned sites. Over centuries, entire cities can become buried or destroyed by natural forces. Yet the Nazca Lines stretched across the desert floor of southern Peru for a very long time. The reason lies almost entirely within the unusual environment surrounding them. The Nazca region is one of the driest places on Earth. Rainfall remains limited across large sections of the desert. Some years may pass with very little measurable rain at all. This dryness changes nearly every aspect of how the landscape behaves over time. In wetter environments, water constantly reshapes the surface through flowing streams, flooding, and soil movement. In the Nazca Desert, however, the absence of regular rainfall allows the ground to remain stable across long periods. The exposed lines survive, partly because the environment around them changes very slowly. Water is one of the most powerful forces shaping landscapes across the planet. Rivers carve valleys through mountains. Rain slowly dissolves stone. Flooding carries away soil and sediment while reshaping entire regions. Human structures built in wet climates often require constant maintenance because moisture gradually weakens exposed materials. The Nazca Desert experiences far less of this activity. Without frequent rain to wash away the lighter exposed soil, the geoglyphs remain visible much longer than they could elsewhere. The same dryness that made survival difficult for ancient communities became the reason their work endured. The desert winds around Nazca also behave differently from what many people imagine when thinking about deserts. Strong enough winds can certainly move dust and loose particles, but the broader environment does not constantly erase the surface patterns. The dark stones surrounding the exposed lines also help stabilize the ground. Together, these conditions reduce the amount of erosion affecting the geoglyphs over time. Vegetation plays another important role in preservation. In wetter climates, plants quickly spread across abandoned ground. Roots break apart surfaces, while grasses and shrubs gradually conceal older structures beneath layers of organic growth. In the Nazca Desert, however, plant life remains limited across much of the landscape because water is so scarce. The absence of thick vegetation allowed the exposed lines to remain visible rather than becoming hidden beneath forests or fields. The open desert surface continued preserving the contrast between darker stones and lighter exposed soil. Standing upon the Nazca Plains today can feel strangely timeless because the landscape changes so slowly compared with greener environments. Wide open desert stretches beneath the sunlight, while distant mountains remain visible beyond the horizon. Dry air moves quietly across the ground. In many areas, the surface appears almost frozen in place. This environmental stability became one of the greatest accidental protectors of the Nazca Lines. The exposed lines themselves remain relatively shallow, yet the stable desert conditions prevented them from disappearing quickly. Once the darker surface stones were removed, the lighter ground beneath remained visible because little disturbed it afterward. The environment acted almost like a giant natural preservation chamber spread across the landscape. Ancient communities likely did not fully understand how long the designs would survive, yet the desert quietly protected their work across generations. Temperature also contributes to the unique conditions surrounding the Nazca Lines. Desert environments often experience strong sunlight during the day, with cooler conditions developing at night. Over long periods, repeated heating and cooling can affect rock surfaces and soil composition. In the Nazca region, the dark surface stones absorbed heat beneath the intense sunlight, while helping maintain the visible contrast surrounding the lighter exposed lines. Environmental conditions continued reinforcing the appearance of the geoglyphs rather than quickly destroying them. The Nazca Lines remained exposed because the desert environment limited these processes. Instead of disappearing beneath layers of soil or plant growth, the design stayed visible across the surface itself. This unusual preservation allows observers to experience the geoglyphs within the same broad environment where ancient communities originally created them. Even small environmental changes could potentially affect the geoglyphs. Increased rainfall, heavier human traffic, or stronger erosion would gradually weaken the visibility of the lines over time. Modern preservation efforts therefore focus heavily on protecting the fragile desert surface itself. The Nazca Lines may appear permanent from the air, Yet their survival still depends upon maintaining the environmental stability that preserved them for centuries. The survival of the Nazca Lines depends upon a delicate balance between climate, geology, and environmental stability. Across much of the world, exposed surfaces change constantly beneath rain, vegetation, flowing water, and shifting soil. Human activity leaves marks upon the landscape, but nature slowly reshapes them over time. Roads fade, ancient pathways disappear beneath forests, flooding buries old settlements beneath layers of sediment. The Nazca Desert followed a different pattern. Instead of rapidly changing, the environment remained stable across long stretches of time. This stability became one of the most important reasons the geoglyphs survived into the modern world. Climate strongly influences how long human creations remain visible. In tropical regions, heavy rainfall and thick vegetation can erase exposed structures surprisingly quickly. Jungle environments swallow abandoned stone cities beneath vines and roots. Coastal storms wear away buildings near the ocean. Cold climates crack stone through repeated freezing and thawing. Every environment shapes history differently through weather and geological activity. The Nazca Desert preserved the lines because its conditions limited many of the natural forces that normally destroy exposed surfaces. Dryness became one of the greatest protectors of the Nazca Lines. Rainfall remained so limited that erosion progressed very slowly across the region. Water did not regularly wash soil across the plains or carve new channels through the geoglyphs. The lighter exposed lines remained visible because little disturbed the surface after the stones were removed. Even after centuries beneath the sky, many patterns continued stretching across the desert almost exactly where ancient communities created them. The dark surface stones surrounding the exposed lines also help maintain the appearance of the geoglyphs. These rocks protect portions of the desert floor from disturbance, while creating strong contrast against the lighter soil beneath. Once ancient communities removed the stones to form visible patterns, the surrounding darker ground continued framing the exposed designs. The desert surface itself reinforced the visibility of the lines through differences in color and texture. The survival of the Nazca Lines also reminds people how fragile archaeological history can be. Even stable deserts are not completely immune to change. Human activity, construction, vehicle traffic, and environmental shifts can damage exposed surfaces surprisingly quickly. Because the geoglyphs remain shallow and delicate, preserving the surrounding environment continues to remain extremely important. The same conditions that protected the lines for centuries can still be disrupted if the landscape changes too rapidly. Scientists studying the Nazca region continue examining how climate patterns influence preservation. Temperature changes, soil conditions, and long-term environmental stability all affect how the desert behaves over time. Understanding these factors helps researchers protect the geoglyphs, while also learning more about how ancient environments influenced human activity throughout the region. The Nazca people instead created designs dependent upon environmental balance. Thin exposed lines spread across the earth remained visible because the desert stayed dry, calm, and relatively unchanged. The environment itself became part of the construction process by protecting the finished designs after they were created. Among the most famous features of the Nazca Lines are the enormous animal figures spread across the desert plains of southern Peru. From high above the earth, giant creatures begin to emerge from the landscape itself. Long wings stretch outward across the ground. Curving tails spiral through the desert surface. Thin legs extend across rocky terrain, while shaped outlines form recognizable living forms visible from the sky. These geoglyphs transformed ordinary animals into immense figures, large enough to occupy broad sections of the desert. The contrast between familiar creatures and immense scale gives the Nazca Lines much of their lasting fascination. Birds appear frequently among the Nazca designs. Some figures resemble hummingbirds with long pointed beaks and delicate wings extending across the plains. Others appear similar to condors or other large birds associated with the skies above Peru. The outlines remain simplified rather than highly detailed, yet the overall shapes still feel immediately recognizable when viewed from above. A few placed curves and straight paths become enough for the human brain to identify wings, tails, and bodies spread across enormous distances. The hummingbird became one of the most famous Nazca figures, partly because of its graceful proportions. Its long beak stretches outward, while narrow wings spread across the desert floor with balanced symmetry. Seen from the air, the design almost appears weightless, despite its enormous scale. The figure demonstrates how the Nazca people understood visual simplicity. They did not need countless details to create recognizable forms. Other animal figures include monkeys, spiders, fish, and mammals, represented through stylized outlines rather than realistic anatomy. The monkey figure, for example, contains a recognizable spiral shape within the Nazca Desert. Its curling tail loops across the ground in a smooth, continuous form, while long limbs extend outward from the body. The spider appears with thin, extended legs spreading across the desert surface. Each figure balances simplicity with recognizable structure. Stylization played an important role in these designs. Ancient artists did not attempt to reproduce animals exactly as they appeared in nature. Instead, they simplified shapes into clear outlines that remained visible at immense scale. Curves became smoother. Body structures became more geometric. Details were reduced, so the larger figure could still be recognized from great distances. This approach resembles the way modern logos or symbols simplify complex forms into clean, recognizable shapes. The Nazca people understood that large-scale visibility required clarity rather than excessive detail. Against the reddish-brown landscape, exposed lighter lines created strong contrast, visible from elevated perspectives. The animals appear almost drawn directly onto the earth. The emptiness surrounding them increases their emotional effect because the figures emerge suddenly from otherwise quiet desert terrain. Scale completely transforms the emotional experience of these animal figures. A small drawing of a bird on paper feels decorative and personal. A bird spread across hundreds of feet of desert feels mysterious and monumental. Human beings naturally respond differently to enormous scale because it changes ordinary relationships between objects and space. The Nazca animal figures therefore create a strange combination of familiarity and vastness. The creatures themselves remain recognizable, yet their immense size makes them feel almost unreal within the landscape. Some researchers believe the animal figures may have carried symbolic or cultural importance within Nazca society. Animals often appear within religious traditions, mythology, and artistic expression across ancient civilizations throughout the world. Birds may connect to the sky, while other creatures relate to water, fertility, or environmental cycles. Although many details remain uncertain, the repeated appearance of animals across the Nazca Desert suggests they likely carried meaning beyond simple decoration. The figures also reveal how ancient communities organized visual information across enormous areas. Creating recognizable creatures at such scale required planning and proportion. If a wing became too short, or a body stretched incorrectly, the figure might lose its recognizable shape when viewed from above. The Nazca people therefore needed methods for maintaining balance and structure across open terrain, far larger than ordinary drawings. Their success remains visible today whenever aerial photographs reveal clear animal forms spread across the desert. One of the most unusual aspects of the Nazca animal figures is that many cannot be fully appreciated from nearby ground level. A person standing within the hummingbird geoglyph might see only separate sections of exposed lines crossing the desert floor. The complete bird emerges only through distance and perspective. This creates an unusual relationship between artwork and visibility because the designs depend upon elevated viewing to reveal their full structure. The open skies above the Nazca Plains contribute strongly to this experience. Aircraft flying over the region reveal giant creatures stretched quietly across the earth below. Shadows move slowly across the desert, while thin, exposed outlines remain visible beneath the sunlight. The figures appear calm and motionless against the wide, empty plains. Their stillness becomes part of their emotional effect. The Nazca Lines are one of the few archaeological sites on Earth where understanding depends almost entirely upon perspective. From nearby ground level, the desert often appears quiet and nearly empty beneath the sunlight. Thin, exposed lines cross the surface, while scattered stones cover the surrounding plains. A person standing directly beside one of the geoglyphs may see only isolated sections of paths cutting through the ground. The immense organization of the site remains hidden until distance and elevation reveal the larger picture. Height transforms confusion into structure. Most human creations are designed to be experienced from nearby positions. Buildings rise upward where people can stand beneath them. Paintings hang at eye level upon walls. Roads guide movement across landscapes in visible directions. The Nazca Lines operate differently because their full forms often disappear when viewed too closely. The farther away the observer moves, the more recognizable the patterns become. Imagine standing beside one wing of the famous hummingbird figure. From nearby ground level, the exposed line might simply appear as a pale strip of soil crossing the desert surface. The curve of the wing extends beyond immediate vision, while the rest of the bird remains invisible from that position. Walking farther across the plain gradually reveals more structure, yet the complete figure still remains difficult to understand without elevation. Only from high above does the hummingbird emerge fully with balanced wings, a long pointed beak, and organized proportions spread across the earth. This experience changes the emotional relationship between people and landscape. Nearby environments usually feel immediate and understandable because the human eye naturally organizes objects within ordinary scale. The Nazca Lines challenge this process because the patterns exceed normal human perspective. The desert contains structures too large to fully comprehend from within them. Human beings become physically present inside shapes larger than ordinary perception can easily process. Before modern aviation, many of the Nazca geoglyphs could only be partially understood from surrounding hills or elevated terrain. People living within the region likely recognized certain lines and figures from nearby viewpoints, yet the complete organization of the landscape remained difficult to observe directly. The arrival of aircraft transformed understanding dramatically. Suddenly, the giant animal figures and geometric designs became visible as complete structures from above the desert plains. Aerial photography revealed how extensive the Nazca Lines truly were. From the air, broad sections of the desert suddenly displayed organized patterns stretching across the landscape. Straight lines crossed plains precisely. Spirals curved through open terrain. Animal figures emerged clearly from the earth. The desert transformed from a quiet, empty environment into one of the largest visual archaeological sites on the planet. This transformation through height resembles the experience of looking at a giant mosaic from nearby compared with viewing it from a distance. Up close, individual pieces appear disconnected and abstract. Stepping farther away allows the complete image to emerge gradually from separate fragments. The Nazca Lines produce a similar effect across enormous scale. The closer the observer stands to the lines themselves, the harder it often becomes to recognize the full design. Aircraft therefore became essential tools for archaeological study within the Nazca region. Researchers could finally map large sections of the desert accurately, while documenting figures impossible to fully observe from the ground alone. Photography from above allowed scientists to compare shapes, study alignments, and identify relationships between different geoglyphs spread across the plains. Technology expanded human perspective far beyond what ancient communities or early explorers could easily experience. Clear desert air often provides excellent viewing conditions across broad distances. Sunlight strikes the exposed lines while shadows and contrast strengthen the visibility of the figures against the darker surrounding surface. From above, the desert becomes almost like a giant illustrated surface spread beneath the aircraft. Thin, pale lines form birds, animals, spirals, and geometric structures stretching quietly across the earth. Although the giant animal figures of the Nazca Desert attract much of the public attention, some of the most visually striking features of the region are actually the geometric patterns spread across the plains of southern Peru. Long straight lines extend across the desert for great distances, while spirals, triangles, and broad geometric forms stretch beneath the sunlight. These designs appear simple at first glance, yet their scale and precision create a powerful emotional effect within the open landscape. The desert itself begins to resemble an enormous surface covered with organized marks visible from above. Straight lines became one of the defining characteristics of the Nazca region. Some continue across open plains toward distant hills while maintaining consistent direction over long distances. Viewed from aircraft, these lines appear almost like rays stretching outward across the desert surface. Their simplicity becomes part of their power. A single pale line crossing empty terrain immediately attracts human attention because people naturally notice alignment and order within open spaces. Creating long straight paths across rough desert terrain required careful planning and observation. Even small directional changes become highly visible when extended across great distances. Ancient communities therefore needed methods for maintaining alignment while working across broad sections of landscape. Some lines continue over low hills and uneven ground without losing their overall direction. The precision visible in many of these designs continues surprising observers because the geoglyphs were created without modern surveying equipment or aerial visibility. Forests, rivers, or dense vegetation would have broken the continuity of the patterns. The Nazca Plains instead provided broad, uninterrupted surfaces where lines could extend beneath clear skies for enormous distances. The environment allowed geometry itself to become part of the landscape. Spirals represent another important geometric feature within the Nazca Lines. Unlike the straight paths cutting sharply across the plains, spirals create flowing, curved movement across the desert floor. Some appear connected to animal figures, while others stand alone as geometric forms. The spiral shape naturally draws the human eye inward through repeated circular motion. Even simple curves become visually powerful when expanded across large areas of desert terrain. Triangles and trapezoid-like forms also appear throughout the Nazca region. Some broad geometric areas widen outward, while others narrow into long pathways crossing the plains. From above, these shapes create organized visual structures spread across the landscape. The relationship between narrow lines and broad geometric surfaces gives the Nazca Desert a surprisingly varied appearance when viewed from the air. Thin paths intersect with large, open forms, while geometric patterns stretch outward across the terrain. A hummingbird or monkey immediately suggests recognizable imagery connected to living creatures. Long straight lines and giant geometric patterns leave greater room for interpretation because their meaning feels less obvious. Human beings naturally search for explanations when encountering organized structures at enormous scale. The Nazca geometric forms therefore continue inspiring curiosity and debate among archaeologists and visitors alike. The desert environment also intensifies the visual calm of these patterns. Thin, pale lines stretch silently beneath bright skies, while shadows move slowly across distant hills. The stillness of the landscape allows the geometry to dominate attention. The lines appear almost motionless and timeless against the broad, empty plains. Their quiet simplicity creates an atmosphere very different from crowded urban environments, filled with constant movement and visual noise. Some researchers believe certain geometric lines may have guided movement through the landscape or connected important locations within the region. Others focus upon ceremonial or symbolic possibilities. Definitive answers remain difficult because the lines survive without written explanations from the people who created them. Yet regardless of original purpose, the geometric structures demonstrate strong organization across large-scale environments. Perspective once again plays a major role in understanding these designs. From nearby ground level, many geometric forms appear fragmented or incomplete. Walking beside a straight line may reveal only a narrow, exposed path crossing the desert surface. Rising above the landscape transforms isolated sections into organized visual structures stretching across the plains. Geometry emerges through distance and height. The Nazca Lines may appear simple when viewed from high above the desert, yet the organization required to create them reveals careful planning across enormous sections of landscape. Straight paths maintain consistent direction across uneven terrain. Animal figures preserve recognizable proportions despite their immense size. Geometric shapes remain balanced across open plains, where even small mistakes could become highly visible from elevated perspectives. The more closely researchers study the Nazca Lines, the more clearly deliberate structure and coordination begin to emerge throughout the desert environment. Straight lines especially reveal evidence of careful planning because maintaining direction across long distances becomes surprisingly difficult without reference points. A person attempting to walk in a perfectly straight path across open terrain will usually drift gradually without realizing it. The Nazca Lines show that ancient communities developed methods for preserving alignment across broad areas of desert. Some lines extend over hills and shallow slopes while remaining visually consistent. This suggests that the creators understood how to organize movement through the landscape with considerable accuracy. Reference markers may have helped ancient workers maintain direction while creating the lines. Small stakes, ropes, or chosen landmarks across the desert could have guided construction. Distant hills and mountains surrounding the Nazca Plains may also have served as natural points of orientation. The open environment allowed long sight lines across broad areas, making it possible to maintain alignment visually across the terrain. Ancient communities likely combined environmental observation with organized labor to shape the desert surface gradually into visible patterns. Animal figures required another level of planning because recognizable proportions needed to remain balanced across enormous scale. A wing placed slightly too high or a curve extended too far could distort the entire image when viewed from above. The Nazca people therefore had to think beyond ordinary drawing methods used at small scale. They organized shapes across open ground large enough to challenge direct human perception. This required spatial thinking, capable of translating smaller concepts into giant forms spread across the landscape itself. The Nazca Desert also reveals evidence of repeated organization rather than isolated individual effort. Hundreds of lines and figures spread across the region. Such large-scale activity likely involved many people working together over long periods. Organizing labor across open terrain requires communication and shared understanding of goals. Ancient communities may have coordinated movement, measurement, and construction in ways adapted specifically to the desert environment around them. Precision within the Nazca Lines becomes even more remarkable when considering the absence of aerial visibility during construction. Observers often first encounter the geoglyphs through aircraft photographs showing complete figures from above. Ancient workers creating the lines could not simply rise into the air to check proportions easily. They instead relied on planning methods grounded entirely within the landscape itself. Their success reveals impressive understanding of scale, direction, and visual organization. The Nazca people likely experienced the landscape differently from modern visitors because they understood the environment through movement, memory, and repeated interaction rather than through aerial photography. Straight lines crossing the plains may have guided travel or ceremonial activity. Geometric spaces may have carried social or symbolic importance. The desert itself became organized according to patterns meaningful within Nazca culture. One of the reasons the Nazca Lines continue attracting worldwide fascination is because their exact purpose remains uncertain even after decades of archaeological study. The geoglyphs survive clearly across the desert plains of southern Peru, yet the people who created them left behind no written explanation describing precisely why they were made. Modern researchers can study the shapes, examine the landscape, and analyze the environmental conditions surrounding the site. But many questions remain open to interpretation. This uncertainty gives the Nazca Lines much of their enduring mystery. Giant figures stretch across the earth. Straight lines continue toward distant hills. Geometric patterns spread across the plains precisely. Such large, coordinated activity suggests that the lines carried importance within Nazca society, yet determining exactly what that importance involved remains difficult centuries later. Archaeologists therefore study evidence while exploring different possibilities connected to culture, environment, and human behavior. One major interpretation suggests that some of the Nazca Lines may have served ceremonial or ritual purposes. Ancient societies throughout the world often created large symbolic spaces connected to spiritual practices, seasonal events, or communal gatherings. Open landscapes became places where movement, symbolism, and environmental observation carried cultural meaning. Some researchers believe certain Nazca Lines may have functioned as ceremonial pathways where groups of people walked across the desert during important events or rituals. The immense scale of the geoglyphs may support this possibility because the lines create visible organization across broad sections of landscape rather than within enclosed buildings. The Nazca Lines may therefore represent more than visual images viewed from above. They may also have shaped how people physically experience the desert through walking, gathering, and organized activity across the plains. Water also appears frequently within theories surrounding the Nazca Lines because survival in the region depended heavily upon limited water resources. Southern Peru remains one of the driest environments on Earth, and ancient communities relied upon careful management of water flowing from the Andes Mountains into desert valleys. Rivers, underground channels, and seasonal rainfall all carried enormous importance within daily life. Some researchers believe the lines may have connected symbolically or practically to water sources throughout the landscape. This theory becomes especially interesting because many lines extend across regions connected to dry valleys and environmental pathways shaped by water movement. Certain geoglyphs may have marked locations important to survival within the harsh desert environment. Ancient communities living under difficult climatic conditions often develop cultural systems deeply connected to rainfall, fertility, and environmental stability. The Nazca Lines may therefore reflect human concern with water and survival within an arid landscape. Animal imagery within the geoglyphs may also connect symbolically to environmental cycles. Birds, monkeys, spiders, and other creatures often carry meaning within cultural traditions around the world. Some animals become associated with rain, fertility, agriculture, or the natural environment. The repeated appearance of these figures across the Nazca Desert suggests that they likely held importance beyond decoration alone. Although exact meanings remain uncertain, the geoglyphs probably reflected ideas significant within Nazca culture itself. The challenge for modern researchers is that evidence remains incomplete. Ancient civilizations without written records leave behind physical traces rather than direct explanations. Archaeologists must therefore interpret landscapes, objects, and environmental relationships while avoiding unsupported conclusions. The Nazca Lines survive clearly upon the Earth, yet their creators cannot explain their intentions directly. This forces modern understanding to remain cautious and open to multiple possibilities. Some theories proposed in the past became more speculative than scientific. Popular imagination occasionally connected the Nazca Lines to unlikely explanations involving lost civilizations or visitors from beyond Earth. Such ideas attracted public attention because the immense scale of the geoglyphs feels surprising and mysterious. Modern archaeological research, however, focuses upon evidence grounded within the actual environment and culture of ancient Peru. The lines were created by human communities adapting creatively to the desert landscape around them. The mystery surrounding the Nazca Lines therefore reflects not impossibility, but the natural limits of historical knowledge. Many ancient societies left behind incomplete records. Archaeologists often reconstruct past behavior using fragments of evidence preserved through time. Pottery, tools, environmental conditions, and spatial organization all contribute pieces to a larger puzzle. The Nazca Lines remain part of this process of gradual interpretation and study. People often expect simple final answers to historical questions, yet ancient societies were complex human communities shaped by many influences at once. The Nazca Lines may have carried ceremonial meaning while also relating to movement, environment, or social organization. Multiple purposes may have existed together rather than separately. Human behavior rarely follows only one explanation. The desert environment surrounding the geoglyphs also shapes interpretation because the harsh conditions influence nearly every aspect of Nazca life. Water scarcity, open terrain, and environmental stability all affected how people experienced the landscape. The lines did not exist apart from these realities. They formed within a difficult environment where survival depended upon understanding geography and climate. Any explanation for the geoglyphs must therefore consider the environmental pressures surrounding Nazca society. The mystery of the Nazca Lines continues partly because the site balances visibility with uncertainty. The designs themselves remain easy to observe from the air. Giant figures stretch clearly across the earth while geometric patterns remain preserved beneath the sunlight. Yet meaning remains more difficult to uncover than visibility. Human beings can see the lines directly, but understanding the full intentions behind them requires interpretation across centuries of historical distance. Researchers continue studying the Nazca region because new discoveries still emerge through archaeology, mapping, and environmental analysis. Improved technology allows scientists to identify additional figures and examine relationships between the lines and surrounding terrain more than before. Knowledge develops gradually as evidence accumulates over time. The desert continues revealing information slowly beneath the same dry skies that preserved the geoglyphs for centuries. The Nazca region presents both clear visibility and frustrating limitations at the same time. The geoglyphs themselves remain clear beneath the dry skies of southern Peru. Giant animal figures, straight lines, and geometric patterns continue stretching across the plains, exactly where ancient communities created them centuries ago. Yet the people who organized these projects left behind no written explanations describing their intentions directly. Archaeologists therefore study physical evidence rather than historical documents. The desert preserves the lines, but not complete answers. One important aspect of archaeology is learning how to separate mystery from sensationalism. The Nazca Lines became famous partly because their enormous scale feels surprising and unusual. Giant figures spread across the desert naturally inspire imagination. Over the years, some people proposed highly speculative explanations disconnected from the actual evidence found within the region. Extraordinary claims often attract attention because human beings enjoy mystery and dramatic stories. Scientific research, however, focuses upon what can reasonably be supported through physical evidence and environmental understanding. Modern archaeologists studying the Nazca Lines examine how ancient communities could realistically create the geoglyphs using available tools, environmental knowledge, and organized labor. Researchers study desert geology, climate conditions, and nearby settlements while comparing the Nazca culture to other ancient societies throughout Peru. The evidence consistently shows that the lines emerged through human planning and cooperation within the environmental conditions of southern Peru, rather than through impossible or supernatural events. This scientific approach does not remove wonder from the Nazca Lines. In many ways, understanding the real environmental and cultural context makes the site even more fascinating. Ancient communities living within a harsh desert environment transformed the landscape itself into one of the largest geoglyph collections on Earth, using relatively simple methods combined with organization. Human creativity and environmental adaptation become more impressive when understood realistically rather than through fantasy. Archaeological interpretation also changes gradually as new discoveries emerge. Improved aerial photography, satellite imagery, and mapping technologies continue revealing additional details throughout the Nazca region. Smaller geoglyphs hidden within the desert surface have been identified through modern imaging methods that earlier researchers could not easily access. Each new discovery adds more information while also creating new questions about how the landscape developed over time. Different lines and figures may also reflect different periods within Nazca culture rather than one single moment of construction. Archaeologists therefore study overlapping patterns, environmental relationships, and stylistic differences between geoglyphs. Some figures appear more complex, while others remain simple geometric forms. Certain lines intersect, while others avoid crossing entirely. These details help researchers understand how the desert landscape gradually accumulated organized human activity across generations. Interpretation becomes especially difficult because human societies are rarely shaped by only one purpose or idea. People sometimes search for a single explanation that fully defines the Nazca Lines, yet ancient cultures often combined practical, ceremonial, environmental, and symbolic behavior together within the same landscape. A line could hold cultural significance while also guiding movement through the desert. A figure could connect to ceremony, environmental observation, or social identity at the same time. Human behavior remains complex across all periods of history. The Nazca Desert itself also influences how researchers interpret the site because environmental conditions shaped nearly every aspect of life within the region. Water scarcity, open terrain, and stable climate conditions affected survival, settlement patterns, and movement across the landscape. Archaeologists therefore examine how geography and environmental pressure may have influenced the creation of the geoglyphs. The lines cannot be understood fully apart from the harsh desert world surrounding them. Science also recognizes the importance of uncertainty itself. Admitting incomplete knowledge is not weakness within archaeology, it is part of honest research. Ancient societies often leave behind evidence that supports several possible interpretations rather than one final answer. Researchers continue refining ideas as new information emerges, while remaining careful not to claim certainty beyond what evidence actually supports. New discoveries reveal additional details, while other questions remain unresolved. Over decades, understanding grows gradually through careful work carried out by many researchers across different fields, including archaeology, geology, climate science, and anthropology. The Nazca region continues teaching scientists about ancient human behavior, environmental adaptation, and landscape organization, even now. Public fascination with the Nazca Lines also reflects something deeply human about curiosity itself. People naturally wonder why giant figures stretch across the desert floor. They search for meaning within enormous patterns preserved beneath the sky. Mystery attracts attention because the human mind seeks explanations for organized structures and unusual environments. Even after generations of study, the Nazca Desert continues holding unanswered questions beneath the sunlight. Straight lines still cross the plains, while giant figures remain visible from the sky. Archaeologists continue mapping, studying, and comparing evidence in order to understand the people who transformed the landscape long ago. Across the quiet desert, the Nazca Lines remain suspended between visibility and mystery, preserving one of the most fascinating archaeological puzzles in the ancient world. To understand how the Nazca people survived within the dry deserts of southern Peru, it becomes necessary to understand water itself and the unusual ways it moves through arid landscapes. At first glance, the Nazca region can appear almost completely lifeless beneath the sunlight. Broad plains stretch across the desert floor, while rocky hills rise beyond dry valleys cut into the terrain. Many river channels appear empty for long periods, carrying no visible water across their surfaces. Yet beneath this harsh environment, hidden systems of seasonal movement and underground moisture shaped human survival throughout the region. Dry riverbeds form an important part of desert geography in many parts of the world. These channels may remain empty during long stretches of time before suddenly carrying water after seasonal rainfall or mountain runoff. In some regions, these temporary waterways are known as wadis. The Nazca landscape contains similar dry channels shaped by water movement flowing outward from the Andes Mountains far to the east. Although the desert receives very little rainfall, water originating in distant highlands still influences the region through seasonal river systems and underground flow. The Andes Mountains act like enormous environmental engines, shaping much of western South America. Moisture gathers at high elevations, where snow and rainfall collect across the mountains. Rivers then carry this water downward through valleys and dry regions below. In the Nazca area, these seasonal systems became essential because local rainfall alone could not reliably support large human communities. Water arriving from distant mountains allowed certain valleys within the desert to support agriculture and settlement despite the surrounding arid conditions. Many dry riverbeds within the Nazca region appear quiet and inactive most of the time. Their surfaces remain dusty beneath the sunlight, while stones and sediment cover the channels. Yet these valleys preserve evidence of powerful environmental movement over long periods. During seasonal runoff or rare heavy rainfall events, water can suddenly move through areas that appear completely dry for months or years. Desert landscapes therefore contain hidden patterns of movement that may not be immediately visible during ordinary conditions. Ancient communities living within the Nazca region needed detailed knowledge of these environmental systems. Understanding where water flowed, where underground moisture remained accessible, and which valleys supported agriculture could determine survival itself. Human settlement patterns throughout the desert likely depended heavily upon access to reliable seasonal water sources. Fertile land remained limited, making environmental knowledge extremely important within daily life. The contrast between dry open desert and narrow fertile valleys strongly shaped the human experience of southern Peru. A person traveling across broad rocky plains beneath the heat might suddenly encounter green cultivated areas near water channels descending from the mountains. These fertile spaces became centers of agriculture and settlement, surrounded by otherwise harsh terrain. Ancient communities learned how to adapt their lives around these environmental differences. Water movement also influenced the appearance of the landscape itself. Over long periods, flowing water carved valleys through the terrain while carrying sediment across lower elevations. Dry channels visible today often preserve the shape of ancient environmental processes that unfolded gradually across centuries. Even in regions where visible water rarely appears, the marks left by past movement remain visible within the earth. The Nazca people likely developed strong awareness of seasonal environmental cycles because survival depended upon recognizing them accurately. Rainfall patterns in the Andes, changes in river flow, and underground water conditions would all affect farming success and food availability. Ancient societies living within dry climates often become highly attentive to environmental change because small differences in water availability can produce major consequences for entire communities. Researchers studying the geoglyphs have considered whether certain patterns or pathways related symbolically or practically to water sources across the desert. Although definitive answers remain difficult to prove, the importance of water within Nazca life makes environmental interpretation an important part of archaeological study throughout the region. Rare rainfall events in desert environments can create dramatic transformation across otherwise dry landscapes. A valley remaining empty for long periods may suddenly carry fast-moving water after distant storms in the mountains. Dry soil absorbs moisture quickly, while temporary streams reshape channels across the terrain. Ancient communities witnessing these changes would have recognized how deeply survival depended upon environmental cycles, often controlled by distant weather systems beyond the immediate desert itself. The open plains surrounding the Nazca Lines therefore existed within a larger environmental network connected to mountains, valleys, and seasonal water movement. The desert was never completely isolated from natural cycles. Instead, it remained part of a broader system where climate, geography, and hydrology influenced human settlement and activity across southern Peru. Underground water also became extremely important in the region. Some areas contained aquifers and subsurface moisture accessible through wells or engineered systems. Ancient communities often developed methods for reaching underground water because surface rivers alone could not always provide stable long-term supply. This hidden relationship between desert surfaces and underground moisture shaped how people organized life within the harsh environment around them. The Nazca Desert may appear empty and motionless beneath the sunlight, Yet hidden environmental systems constantly influence the region across time. Water flowed seasonally from distant mountains. Dry riverbeds preserved traces of past movement. Fertile valleys interrupted otherwise arid plains. Human communities adapted themselves to these environmental realities while surviving within one of the driest regions on Earth. Even today, the geography surrounding the Nazca Lines still reflects this balance between dryness and hidden water movement. Valleys continue descending from the Andes, while dry channels cross the landscape beneath the sky. The same environmental systems that shaped ancient survival remain active throughout the region now. Across southern Peru, the desert still carries evidence of water, climate, and geography, quietly shaping human history across long stretches of time. Life within the Nazca region required constant adaptation to one of the harshest environments in South America. The desert surrounding the geoglyphs may appear quiet and beautiful beneath the sunlight, yet survival there demanded careful planning, environmental knowledge, and efficient use of limited resources. Water remained scarce. Fertile land existed only in certain valleys. Temperatures could become intense beneath the sky, while broad stretches of rocky terrain separated communities across the landscape. Ancient communities living within this environment needed to understand geography closely. Because the desert allowed very little room for error, people living in wetter regions often experience water as something ordinary and constantly available. Rivers flow year-round. Rain arrives regularly through changing seasons. Vegetation spreads naturally across the landscape without much effort. The Nazca Desert offered a very different reality. Every reliable source of water carried importance because agriculture, settlement, and survival all depended upon it. Ancient communities learned to organize life around rivers, underground water, and seasonal environmental cycles flowing from the Andes Mountains. The open desert itself could become dangerous for long travel without preparation. Broad plains stretched beneath intense sunlight, while natural shelter remained limited across much of the region. Distances between fertile valleys could feel enormous when crossing dry terrain on foot. Ancient travelers needed knowledge of pathways, water access, and environmental conditions in order to move safely through the landscape. Geography shaped movement constantly within Nazca society. Resource limitations often influence how human communities organize themselves. In environments where food and water remain difficult to obtain, societies frequently develop strong systems of cooperation and environmental awareness. Ancient Nazca communities likely depended heavily upon shared labor, agricultural coordination, and careful management of available land. Farming in dry valleys required understanding water flow, soil conditions, and seasonal timing. Human survival depended directly upon environmental balance. The fertile valleys connected to rivers descending from the Andes became especially important because they interrupted otherwise arid terrain with areas capable of supporting agriculture. Crops could grow where water remained accessible, while nearby desert plains stayed dry and rocky beneath the sun. This sharp contrast between productive land and harsh surroundings shaped daily experience throughout the region. Ancient communities likely developed strong familiarity with local geography because survival required detailed environmental knowledge passed through generations. People learned where seasonal water appeared, which pathways remained safest during travel, and how changing conditions affected agriculture. environmental memory became part of cultural continuity. Knowledge of the land itself carried enormous value within desert societies. The Nazca Lines emerged within this world of environmental pressure and adaptation. The geoglyphs were not isolated artistic creations disconnected from ordinary life. They existed within a landscape where human survival depended upon understanding water, terrain, and climate. The same communities, shaping giant figures across the desert, were also farming narrow valleys, managing limited resources, and adapting themselves to difficult conditions year after year. Broad skies stretch above empty plains, while distant mountains remain visible along the horizon. During daylight hours, sunlight reflects strongly from the rocky surface. At night, temperatures can become much cooler beneath clear skies. Ancient communities experience these environmental rhythms directly within everyday life. The landscape shaped not only practical survival, but also emotional experience and cultural identity. Adaptation to harsh environments often encourages creativity because communities must find ways to survive despite limited natural advantages. Ancient Nazca society demonstrates this clearly. People organized agriculture within dry valleys, developed systems for accessing water, and transformed the desert into one of the largest geoglyph landscapes on Earth. Human creativity became deeply connected to environmental challenge. The scarcity of resources may also have strengthened the importance of social cooperation within Nazca communities. Large construction projects, agricultural work, and long-distance movement across the desert all required coordination between groups of people. Environmental difficulty often pushes societies toward organized collaboration because survival becomes more reliable when effort is shared. The Nazca Lines themselves likely reflect this broader pattern of collective activity across the landscape. The relationship between humans and desert geography also shaped settlement patterns throughout the region. Communities could not simply build anywhere across the open plains because water availability controlled where stable life became possible. Valleys connected to rivers and underground moisture therefore became centers of human activity, surrounded by wide expanses of difficult terrain. Even the visual appearance of the Nazca region reflects this balance between hardship and adaptation. Fertile agricultural spaces appear almost unexpectedly within otherwise dry surroundings. Green vegetation lines sections of river valleys, while nearby desert remains bare and rocky. Human communities learned how to exist within this environmental contrast, rather than attempting to eliminate it completely. The Nazca people therefore represent more than creators of mysterious desert lines. They were skilled environmental observers who survived within a landscape many outsiders would consider nearly uninhabitable. They learned how water moved through dry terrain, how climate shaped agriculture, and how geography influenced movement across the region. Their understanding of the environment became essential to survival itself. Over long periods, these adaptation strategies allowed communities to persist within the harsh conditions of southern Peru, while also creating lasting cultural achievements. The geoglyphs spread across the desert remain one visible result of this relationship between human beings and difficult environments. The same knowledge that supported survival also made large organized projects possible within the landscape. Today, the Nazca Desert still preserves evidence of this ancient balance between environmental hardship and human adaptation. Dry plains continue stretching beneath the sunlight, while valleys descend from distant mountains, carrying limited water across the terrain. The geoglyphs remain visible upon the earth, while the surrounding landscape still reflects the same environmental realities ancient communities once faced long ago. Across southern Peru, the desert continues revealing how geography shapes human life, survival and creativity across generations. For centuries, the Nazca Lines remained spread quietly across the deserts of southern Peru, while most of the world remained unaware of their full scale and organization. People living within the region could see portions of the lines from nearby hills or while traveling across the plains, yet the complete figures remain difficult to understand from ground level alone. Giant birds, spirals, and geometric forms stretched across the earth, but their true appearance stayed hidden within the landscape, because human beings lacked the perspective necessary to fully reveal them. That situation changed dramatically with the arrival of modern aviation. The development of aircraft transformed human understanding of landscapes all over the world. Mountains, forests, and coastlines suddenly became visible from perspectives never before easily accessible. Patterns hidden within geography emerged beneath the wings of early airplanes. Roads, rivers, and settlements revealed relationships impossible to fully recognize from the ground. In southern Peru, aviation unlocked something especially large. When pilots began flying above the Nazca Desert, enormous figures suddenly appeared spread across the plains below. From the air, the desert transformed completely. Thin, exposed lines organized themselves into giant hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, and geometric patterns stretching across the earth. Straight paths extended toward distant hills, while spirals curved across the landscape beneath the sunlight. What appeared fragmented and incomplete from ground level suddenly became coherent and deliberate from above. Aircraft provided the missing perspective needed to reveal the true scale of the Nazca Lines. Early aerial observations created enormous excitement because the geoglyphs seemed almost unbelievable at first glance. Giant drawings visible only from the sky challenged ordinary expectations about ancient human construction. The open desert beneath the aircraft appeared almost like a giant illustrated surface containing enormous hidden images preserved across centuries. Pilots and researchers realized they were observing one of the most unusual archaeological landscapes ever discovered. Aerial photography soon became essential for studying the Nazca Lines more. Photographs taken from above allowed researchers to examine shapes, alignments, and relationships between figures spread across wide areas of terrain. Instead of relying only upon fragmented ground observations, archaeologists could finally view complete designs in their full proportions. This transformed scientific understanding of the region because the geoglyphs could now be mapped and documented systematically. The scarcity of resources may also have strengthened the importance of social cooperation within Nazca communities. Large construction projects, agricultural work, and long-distance movement across the desert all required coordination between groups of people. Environmental difficulty often pushes societies toward organized collaboration because survival becomes more reliable when effort is shared. The Nazca Lines themselves likely reflect this broader pattern of collective activity across the landscape. The relationship between humans and desert geography also shaped settlement patterns throughout the region. Communities could not simply build anywhere across the open plains because water availability controlled where stable life became possible. Valleys connected to rivers and underground moisture therefore became centers of human activity, surrounded by wide expanses of difficult terrain. Even the visual appearance of the Nazca region reflects this balance between hardship and adaptation. Fertile agricultural spaces appear almost unexpectedly within otherwise dry surroundings. Green vegetation lines sections of river valleys, while nearby desert remains bare and rocky. Human communities learned how to exist within this environmental contrast, rather than attempting to eliminate it completely. The Nazca people therefore represent more than creators of mysterious desert lines. They were skilled environmental observers who survived within a landscape many outsiders would consider nearly uninhabitable. They learned how water moved through dry terrain, how climate shaped agriculture, and how geography influenced movement across the region. Their understanding of the environment became essential to survival itself. Over long periods, these adaptation strategies allowed communities to persist within the harsh conditions of southern Peru, while also creating lasting cultural achievements. The geoglyphs spread across the desert remain one visible result of this relationship between human beings and difficult environments. The same knowledge that supported survival also made large organized projects possible within the landscape. Today, the Nazca Desert still preserves evidence of this ancient balance between environmental hardship and human adaptation. Dry plains continue stretching beneath the sunlight, while valleys descend from distant mountains, carrying limited water across the terrain. The geoglyphs remain visible upon the earth, while the surrounding landscape still reflects the same environmental realities ancient communities once faced long ago. Across southern Peru, the desert continues revealing how geography shapes human life, survival, and creativity across generations. For centuries, the Nazca Lines remained spread quietly across the deserts of southern Peru, while most of the world remained unaware of their full scale and organization. People living within the region could see portions of the lines from nearby hills or while traveling across the plains, yet the complete figures remained difficult to understand from ground level alone. Giant birds, spirals, and geometric forms stretched across the earth, but their true appearance stayed hidden within the landscape because human beings lacked the perspective necessary to fully reveal them. That situation changed dramatically with the arrival of modern aviation. The development of aircraft transformed human understanding of landscapes all over the world. Mountains, forests, and coastlines suddenly became visible from perspectives never before easily accessible. Patterns hidden within geography emerged beneath the wings of early airplanes. Roads, rivers, and settlements revealed relationships impossible to fully recognize from the ground. In southern Peru, aviation unlocked something especially large. When pilots began flying above the Nazca Desert, enormous figures suddenly appeared spread across the plains below. From the air, the desert transformed completely. Thin, exposed lines organized themselves into giant hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, and geometric patterns stretching across the earth. Straight paths extended toward distant hills, while spirals curved across the landscape beneath the sunlight. What appeared fragmented and incomplete from ground level suddenly became coherent and deliberate from above. Aircraft provided the missing perspective needed to reveal the true scale of the Nazca Lines. Early aerial observations created enormous excitement because the geoglyphs seemed almost unbelievable at first glance. Giant drawings visible only from the sky challenged ordinary expectations about ancient human construction. The open desert beneath the aircraft appeared almost like a giant illustrated surface containing enormous hidden images preserved across centuries. Pilots and researchers realized they were observing one of the most unusual archaeological landscapes ever discovered. Aerial photography soon became essential for studying the Nazca Lines more. Photographs taken from above allowed researchers to examine shapes, alignments, and relationships between figures spread across wide areas of terrain. Instead of relying only upon fragmented ground observations, archaeologists could finally view complete designs in their full proportions. This transformed scientific understanding of the region because the geoglyphs could now be mapped and documented systematically. The importance of perspective became especially clear through these photographs. A person standing within the desert might see only separate lines crossing the surface, yet a camera positioned high above the plains revealed giant coordinated figures stretching across the earth. The farther the observer moved above the landscape, the more recognizable the patterns became. For earlier generations, however, seeing the Earth from above created entirely new ways of understanding geography. Human beings suddenly recognized patterns invisible from ordinary ground-level experience. The Nazca Lines became one of the most dramatic examples of this transformation because the geoglyphs were specifically large enough to emerge through elevation and distance. The open skies above southern Peru help support these discoveries because the desert environment often provides clear visibility across broad distances. Dry air, strong sunlight, and open terrain allow aerial observers to see the contrast between dark surface stones and lighter exposed lines with remarkable clarity. The desert became almost like a giant natural display, visible from aircraft overhead. Researchers gradually realized that aviation would remain essential for continued Nazca study because many geoglyphs could not be fully appreciated or mapped accurately from the ground alone. Flights above the desert allowed scientists to compare figures, identify new patterns, and study relationships between lines extending across different sections of terrain. Technology expanded human perspective while revealing details hidden for centuries within the landscape. The emotional experience of flying above the Nazca Desert also contributed strongly to public fascination with the site. Passengers looking downward from aircraft windows could suddenly see giant birds, animals, and geometric structures stretched across the earth below. The figures appeared calm beneath the sunlight, while desert plains extended toward distant mountains. The combination of enormous scale, environmental stillness, and hidden organization created an unforgettable visual impression. Aerial discovery also changed how the world imagined ancient civilizations. The Nazca people were no longer understood simply as isolated desert communities surviving within harsh conditions. They became recognized as creators of one of the largest geoglyph landscapes on Earth. Their understanding of scale, organization, and environmental stability appeared far more impressive once the complete figures became visible from above. The rediscovery of the Nazca Lines through aviation demonstrates how technology can reveal hidden layers of human history preserved within ordinary landscapes. The geoglyphs had always existed across the desert plains, yet their full significance remained difficult to recognize until perspective changed. Human beings did not create the lines through modern aircraft, but flight allowed modern civilization to finally understand what ancient communities had shaped across the earth long ago. Even today, many visitors experience the Nazca Lines primarily through aerial tours crossing the desert skies of southern Peru. Aircraft still circle above giant hummingbirds, spirals and geometric paths, while passengers observe the same patterns that first astonished early pilots decades ago. The relationship between the Nazca Lines and the sky therefore continues into the modern world. Perspective remains essential to understanding the landscape. Modern imaging technology expanded this process further. Satellites, digital photography, and mapping systems now allow researchers to examine the desert in large detail. New geoglyphs continue being identified because improved aerial methods reveal patterns difficult to notice from ground level alone. Technology keeps uncovering additional layers within the Nazca landscape beneath the same dry skies that preserved the lines for centuries. Across southern Peru, the giant figures still remain spread quietly across the desert floor, exactly where ancient communities placed them long ago. For generations, their full forms remained hidden within the landscape itself. Then human beings learned to rise above the earth through flight, and suddenly the desert revealed its enormous secret beneath the sky. As modern technology improved throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, scientific understanding of the Nazca Lines expanded far beyond the first aerial observations made from early aircraft. Researchers no longer relied only upon visual impressions from the sky. Archaeologists, survey teams, and environmental scientists began mapping the desert landscape in order to document the geoglyphs with greater precision. The Nazca region gradually transformed from a mysterious collection of giant figures into one of the most closely studied archaeological landscapes in South America. Mapping became one of the most important tools for understanding how the lines spread across the desert. Researchers used aerial photography to trace the shapes and alignments of geoglyphs across wide sections of terrain. Straight lines, animal figures, and geometric forms could now be measured and compared accurately. Distances between designs became easier to analyze, while relationships between different sections of the landscape slowly emerged through careful documentation. The enormous scale of the Nazca region created major challenges for archaeologists because the geoglyphs extend across large open areas rather than remaining concentrated within one small location. Walking through the desert alone could not provide complete understanding of how the patterns connected together. Scientific teams therefore combined ground surveys with aerial photography and mapping systems in order to study the landscape from multiple perspectives at once. Photography from aircraft remained especially valuable because lighting conditions strongly affect the visibility of the lines. During certain times of day, shadows and sunlight increase the contrast between dark surface stones and lighter exposed soil beneath. Under the correct conditions, geoglyphs become far easier to recognize from above. Researchers learned how environmental factors such as angle of light, weather, and elevation influence what becomes visible across the desert surface. Satellite imagery later expanded this process even further. Instead of relying entirely upon aircraft flying above the region, scientists could study large sections of the Nazca Desert using images captured from space. Satellites revealed patterns difficult to notice from the ground, while also helping researchers compare changes across time. Modern imaging systems allowed archaeologists to identify additional geoglyphs hidden within the broader landscape surrounding the most famous figures. Some newly discovered geoglyphs are smaller and less visually dramatic than the giant hummingbirds and monkeys widely known throughout the world. Yet these smaller designs remain extremely important because they help researchers understand how widespread human activity became across the desert environment. The Nazca landscape contains far more complexity than early observers initially realized. Modern technology continues revealing additional layers of organization spread across the plains. Digital mapping also allows scientists to preserve detailed records of fragile geoglyphs that could eventually become damaged through erosion or human activity. Although the desert environment protected the lines for centuries, the surface remains delicate. Vehicle tracks, construction, and increased tourism can disturb exposed soil surprisingly quickly. Detailed scientific documentation therefore became essential not only for research, but also for long-term preservation of the site itself. Researchers studying the Nazca Lines often combine multiple scientific fields together. Archaeology provides information about ancient human behavior and cultural patterns. Geology helps explain the desert surface and environmental stability. Climate science examines how dry conditions preserve the geoglyphs over time. Anthropology studies how human societies organize meaning within landscapes. Modern mapping methods reveal how densely organized some sections of the landscape truly are. Straight lines intersect broad geometric forms, while animal figures appear beside pathways and open spaces across the plains. The desert becomes less like a collection of isolated drawings and more like a coordinated cultural environment shaped through repeated human activity over long periods. Technology also changed how researchers share the Nazca Lines with the wider world. High-resolution aerial photographs, documentaries, and digital models allow millions of people to experience the geoglyphs visually, even if they never travel to Peru. The lines became internationally recognized, partly because photography and imaging technologies made the hidden landscape visible beyond the desert. Scientific research continues because many questions about the Nazca Lines remain unresolved. New discoveries often create additional possibilities for interpretation rather than final conclusions. Archaeologists continue examining how different geoglyphs relate to one another, how environmental conditions shaped construction, and how the lines developed gradually over time. One of the most fascinating aspects of modern Nazca research is that improved technology keeps revealing patterns ancient communities created long ago, but which remain difficult to detect until recently. The geoglyphs existed silently across the plains for centuries beneath the sunlight, yet modern imaging systems continue uncovering additional figures hidden within the broader landscape. Perspective and technology work together to expand human understanding gradually across time. Scientific study also reveals how the Nazca people interacted with the environment around them. Mapping demonstrates that many lines follow organized directions, while figures maintain balanced proportions across enormous distances. The desert itself became a shaped surface, carrying evidence of planning, coordination, and environmental knowledge preserved through centuries of stability. Researchers today often work under difficult desert conditions, similar in some ways to those experienced by ancient communities long ago. The open plains remain hot and dry beneath strong sunlight, while broad distances separate different geoglyph areas. Yet modern tools allow scientists to observe patterns invisible to earlier generations. Drones, satellites, and digital imaging systems now assist archaeological surveys across the region. They remain ancient creations shaped by human hands centuries ago, yet they are also modern scientific subjects studied through advanced technology and environmental analysis. The same giant figures once hidden within the desert are now examined using tools capable of observing the Earth from aircraft and space itself. Across southern Peru, the desert still preserves these enormous patterns beneath the sky, while scientists continue documenting and studying the fragile landscape. Every new photograph, survey, and satellite image adds another layer of understanding to one of the most unusual archaeological environments on Earth. The Nazca Lines remain quiet across the plains, yet modern technology continues revealing their complexity in greater detail with each passing generation. Roads cut across valleys. Agricultural fields alter the appearance of hillsides. Cities expand outward across plains, while paths worn by repeated movement slowly become part of the landscape itself. Most of these marks eventually fade through weather, vegetation, or changing human activity. The Nazca Lines survived because the desert preserved these traces unusually well, allowing people to witness how an ancient society transformed the Earth into a lasting cultural landscape. The Nazca Desert demonstrates that landscapes are not only natural environments shaped by geology and climate, they are also places where human memory, movement, and activity become embedded within the surface of the Earth. Giant geoglyphs stretch across the plains, while straight paths continue toward distant hills beneath the sunlight. These lines represent more than visual images. They are evidence of repeated human interaction with the landscape over time. Every exposed line within the Nazca Desert reflects physical movement carried out by real people long ago. Stones were lifted and moved aside beneath the heat. Groups of workers crossed open plains while shaping visible paths across the ground. Human effort accumulated gradually until enormous patterns spread across the landscape itself. The quiet simplicity of the finished geoglyphs can sometimes hide the countless individual actions required to create them. Many ancient civilizations left behind monuments rising upward into the sky through stone temples, pyramids, or defensive walls. The Nazca people created something very different. Instead of dominating the landscape through height, they transformed the surface of the Earth. The desert became a place where cultural activity remained visible directly upon the ground across immense scale. Ancient agricultural terraces still shape mountain slopes centuries after farming ended. Roman roads remain visible beneath modern cities. Paths carved by repeated movement across open terrain often survive long after their original users disappear. Human societies leave patterns within landscapes, whether intentionally or unintentionally. The Nazca Lines became one of the largest and most visually striking examples of this process preserved anywhere in the world. The stability of the Nazca Desert allowed these marks to survive because the environment changed slowly compared with wetter regions. Rainfall remained limited, while vegetation stayed sparse across the plains. The Earth itself quietly preserved evidence of human activity across generations. Without this unusual environmental stability, many traces of Nazca culture would likely have disappeared long ago beneath erosion or plant growth. The geoglyphs therefore reveal an important truth about archaeology and human history. Landscapes themselves can become historical records. The ground beneath human feet stores evidence of movement, construction, and environmental interaction over time. Ancient communities may disappear, but the marks they leave upon the earth can continue carrying memory forward across centuries. The Nazca region also demonstrates how geography shapes cultural identity. People living within the harsh deserts of southern Peru developed relationships with open plains, dry valleys, and distant mountains, very different from societies living beside forests or rivers. Their environment influenced survival, movement, and artistic expression. The geoglyphs emerged directly from this environmental relationship rather than apart from it. Human beings often imagine landscapes as passive backgrounds where history takes place. The Nazca Lines suggest something more complex. The environment and the people living within it constantly influenced one another. The desert provided stable surfaces and open terrain, while human communities transformed those surfaces into organized patterns visible across enormous distances. Geography shaped culture, while culture reshaped geography in return. The open plains surrounding the Nazca Lines also create a powerful emotional sense of scale and isolation. Standing within the desert today can feel almost timeless because the environment still resembles the same harsh landscape ancient communities once crossed long ago. Dry air moves quietly across the surface, while distant mountains remain visible beneath broad skies. The geoglyphs continue resting upon the earth exactly where they were placed centuries earlier. Time appears compressed within the stillness of the landscape. Modern researchers studying the Nazca Lines therefore examine more than isolated figures or geometric shapes. They study an entire cultural environment shaped through long interaction between people and geography. The desert itself became a record of human behavior, preserved through environmental stability. Every line crossing the plains contributes to this broader relationship between landscape and memory. The Nazca Lines also remind people how fragile cultural landscapes can become once environmental balance changes. A vehicle driving across the desert surface can damage geoglyphs that survived naturally for centuries. Modern construction, erosion, or increased environmental instability could gradually weaken the preservation that once protected the lines so effectively. Protecting the Nazca region therefore means protecting not only individual figures, but the larger relationship between environment and historical memory preserved throughout the landscape. Human beings continue leaving marks upon the earth today, just as ancient societies did long ago. Roads, cities, and industrial systems reshape environments across the modern world at enormous scale. Future generations may one day study these patterns, much as archaeologists now study ancient geoglyphs spread across the desert of Peru. The desert preserved the Nazca geoglyphs because environmental stillness allowed traces of human activity to remain visible across centuries. Giant hummingbirds, spirals, and straight paths still stretch across the plains beneath the sunlight, while the surrounding landscape continues carrying evidence of ancient movement and organization. Across southern Peru, the Nazca Lines remain one of the clearest examples of how geography can preserve cultural memory within the earth. The landscape still carries the marks left behind by ancient communities who understood the environment around them deeply enough to reshape it at large scale. Even after centuries have passed, the desert continues holding their presence beneath the sky. Far across the deserts of southern Peru, the Nazca Lines still remain spread across the earth beneath the sunlight, exactly where ancient communities placed them long ago. Giant hummingbirds stretch delicate wings across the plains, while spirals curve through rocky terrain, and straight lines continue toward distant hills beneath the sky. The desert appears still, yet hidden within that stillness is one of the largest human-made landscapes in the ancient world. Thin, exposed lines crossing the surface of the earth became a lasting record of creativity, survival, and human imagination, preserved across centuries through the unusual stability of the environment itself. The Nazca Lines continue fascinating people because they combine many different ideas at once. They are archaeological structures, yet they are also environmental markings shaped directly into the landscape. They are artistic expressions, yet they also reflect geography, climate, and survival within one of the driest regions on Earth. They are visible and mysterious at the same time. Observers can clearly see giant figures stretching across the desert, yet many questions about their full meaning still remain uncertain centuries later. Ancient communities living within the Nazca region faced difficult environmental conditions throughout daily life. Water remained limited, while broad stretches of harsh desert separated fertile valleys from one another. Survival required environmental knowledge, cooperation, and careful adaptation to climate and geography. Yet within this demanding landscape, human communities still found ways to organize enormous projects across the earth. The Nazca Lines demonstrate how creativity and environmental understanding can emerge together even within difficult conditions. The desert became more than empty terrain surrounding human settlements. It became a surface capable of carrying meaning, structure, and memory across generations. Ancient communities recognized how the stable ground beneath their feet could preserve visible patterns for long periods of time. Through repeated movement and organized labor, they transformed ordinary plains into large structures stretching across immense distances. Human activity became embedded within the earth. The geoglyphs were not built from towering stone walls or enormous carved monuments. Thin, exposed paths across the desert became powerful through scale, organization, and environmental stability. A shallow line in the ground turned into a giant hummingbird visible from the sky. A simple geometric path stretched across the plains until it seemed to merge with the horizon. Human beings used modest methods to create large effects across the landscape. The relationship between the Nazca Lines and perspective also remains deeply important. From nearby ground level, the desert often appears fragmented and incomplete. Lines cross the surface quietly, while the larger patterns remain hidden from ordinary view. Only from above do the giant figures emerge fully across the earth. Distance creates understanding. Height reveals organization. The landscape changes completely depending upon where the observer stands. This unusual dependence upon perspective helped shape modern fascination with the Nazca region after aircraft first revealed the complete figures from the sky. Human beings suddenly realized that an enormous hidden landscape had existed quietly beneath the desert sun for centuries. The earth itself carried giant birds, spirals, and geometric forms visible only through elevation and distance. The discovery transformed the Nazca Lines into a recognizable archaeological sites on the planet. Scientific study continues expanding understanding of the geoglyphs even now. Archaeologists map fragile lines across the plains, while satellites and aerial photography reveal additional patterns hidden within the desert surface. Researchers study climate, geology, and environmental history in order to understand how ancient communities adapted themselves to the harsh landscape around them. The Nazca Desert continues teaching modern science about human creativity, survival, and environmental interaction over time. Yet part of the emotional power of the Nazca Lines comes from the fact that complete certainty may never fully arrive. Ancient communities left behind the lines themselves, but not detailed written explanations describing every purpose or meaning connected to them. The geoglyphs therefore remain suspended between visibility and mystery. Human beings can observe the patterns clearly while still wondering about the lives, beliefs, and intentions of the people who shaped them long ago. The desert environment surrounding the lines strengthens this feeling of mystery and preservation. Open plains stretch beneath the sunlight, while distant mountains remain visible through clear, dry air. Wind moves quietly across rocky ground, where little vegetation interrupts the landscape. Time seems to pass differently within such stillness. The same environmental stability that once challenged human survival also protected the geoglyphs across generations. The Nazca Lines ultimately reveal something important about human beings themselves. Across history, people repeatedly transform landscapes into expressions of memory, organization, and meaning. Roads, temples, fields, and monuments reshape the earth in visible ways. The Nazca people did this upon large scale within one of the driest landscapes on Earth. Their marks remained because the desert quietly preserved them long after individual lives disappeared. Today, aircraft continue flying above the Nazca plains, while passengers look downward at giant hummingbirds, spiders, and endless straight paths crossing the desert below. The same figures once shaped by human hands beneath the heat of southern Peru still remain visible beneath the sky centuries later. The earth itself continues carrying those lines quietly across the landscape. The Nazca Desert therefore stands as both a natural environment and a historical memory preserved within geography itself. Climate protected the geoglyphs. Human creativity shaped the lines. Time passed while the desert remained stable enough to preserve them. Together, environment and human activity created one of the most unusual archaeological landscapes on Earth. As evening light slowly settles across the plains of southern Peru, shadows lengthen beside the exposed lines, while the desert grows quieter beneath the fading warmth of the day. The giant figures remain motionless across the earth, exactly where ancient communities once shaped them long ago. Birds, spirals, and geometric paths continue stretching across the silent landscape beneath the stars. Thank you for listening to the Sleepy Mind channel. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Nazca Lines and the ancient desert world of southern Peru.